Evening. I'm Jonathan O'Brien. The time is 7 o'clock. I'm the news director here at WGUR Radio. Thank you for joining us for this special post-election student roundtable. I'm joined via the marvels of modern technology by my colleagues in student media, Eric Boyd, editor-in-chief of The Colonnade, Timberly Spikes from GC360. We're also joined by political leaders here at Georgia College, Vice President of College Republicans, J.C. Gaylor, President of Georgia College Young Democrats, James Robertson, President of the Georgia College chapter of the Young Americans for Liberty, Ariel Ebaugh, and John Chapman from the Georgia College Political Society. And we are all going to unpack what is an unprecedented election. That seems to be a word that crops itself up a lot in this very interesting of years, that is 2020. As it stands right now, former Vice President Joe Biden is leading in the Electoral College count with 264 electoral votes to President Trump's 214. I want to begin by talking about the big state, which was called by the Associated Press for former Vice President Joe Biden, and that is the state of Michigan. And JC, I want to start with you because it is the incumbent president who is fighting for another term in office. And right now, he is actually suing to stop the vote count in the state of Michigan. I want to ask your opinion on that. And as you look at the results in Michigan, do you think it was a good call? Do you think it's one that can be reversed? And shouldn't we count every vote?
You're exactly right, Jonathan. We should count every vote, and that is exactly what Donald Trump, our president, is trying to do in states like Michigan and Pennsylvania and all the key battleground states, which do have these extremely close margins. And when we have unprecedented amounts of mail-in voting, when we have suspicious behavior and reporting data and how that's being reported, and vote dumps that have so many, like disproportionately amount of Biden votes in those vote dumps, it is important that we have a lot of eyes on these races, and that we have good lawyers in our courts making sure that we are protecting the integrity of our elections, and that we're not giving an open door to endless amounts of ballots coming in. As the president's campaign has said, we are confident. Sorry about that. We are confident about Michigan, and we I feel good about the president's chances to win in that state.
Right. I assume when you talk about the ballot dumps, you're referring to that article that has been going around, that information that's been going around, the 138,000 votes in Michigan. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, there have been numerous amounts of dumps throughout today, both in Wisconsin and Michigan, that have raised eyebrows.
Right. Well, I do want to mention that 138,000 the votes which have come in for former Vice President Biden. An article from the Detroit Free Press and Michigan election officials have said, look, there's no funny business going on. And even the person who tweeted that out to start with has since retracted that, saying, look, I misunderstood the percentages at that time. But I do understand your point. People are nervous about that state. That's a state that President Trump only won by about 10,000 votes back in the 2016 election. No Republican had won it since George H.W. Bush was running back in 1988. James, you and I were on the air for hours last night, and it's good to see you. We might be sitting, we're not standing, and I'm trying to hold on to my mental faculties here. But as you look at the electoral map, it's certainly a better feeling for you than it was last night. Tell me about Michigan. How are you feeling about that? Do you think you're going to hold on to it regardless of the court challenge?
Yeah, I think sort of the courts are not there to, change the outcomes of elections. And when they try and do that, it ends up, they end up losing their own legitimacy. So it's at their own risk. So I think, I echo the sentiments here. Every vote ought to be counted. And I think I'm confident there. I'm not celebrating at all or calling it one way or the other until we know for certain who's over that 270 line. So, a lot of my friends, especially after last night, are worried, rightfully so. Obviously the mail-in, Democrats were more likely to do the mail-in type voting. So I think that's where a lot of, at least the difference is coming from, is, Republicans seem more likely to vote in person, Democrats in the mail. So, we see some of that start to come in now, which is a little bit reassuring. Last night, I when we signed off at about 2, I was pretty pretty tired and pretty concerned. And while I am by no means no longer worried, I am I am feeling better than I did last night.
Very interesting.
John, I'd like
Ariel,
to.
yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Do you think that we'll see this election get settled in court, or do you think Biden and the Democrats are going to be able to keep?
Was that addressed to me or?
To John.
Oh, excuse me.
Me?
Oh Lord, we've got 2 Johns. You talking about John Chapman?
Sorry, JC. I'll refer to you as JC.
Okay, thank you. As of right now, the campaign foresees a victory through winning Arizona. We feel that state was wrongfully called, and we anticipate a victory there. And we also anticipate a victory in Pennsylvania. With the current map, if he wins Arizona and Pennsylvania, that puts him at, I believe, 274, which would be his victory. So right now, I don't think this is going to go to the courts. Should he lose Arizona, then I think we're going to see a lot more interest from the Trump campaign in making sure that election day deadlines and ballots are being more securely counted, and that will require more court litigation.
Is anyone else? James, do you care to comment on that?
No, just that courts aren't supposed to make law, and I hope they don't. I hope they follow the law and when ballots are received before, especially before elections, and mail-in voting, and then they follow the principles of federalism and defer to the states where appropriate. And I think if courts do that and choose not to become politically active, or dare I say even fail to exercise judicial restraint, I think the results will be in, and I think they'll be more trustworthy rather than a protracted legal battle.
Right, Kimberly.
So in local elections, especially in Baldwin County, we're seeing Republicans win by wider margins. Where Purdue actually won, where he carried 107, where Biden actually won instead of Trump. So, JC, I'm going to direct this question to you. Is that concerning to see the Republican nominee kind of lose the Republican side of votes? Because we're seeing more Republicans turn towards Biden in this election.
Are you referring in a national scale or here in Baldwin County?
And we've seen this in other counties as well, but especially in Baldwin County.
Well, as of right now, Joe Biden won Baldwin County by a smaller margin than Hillary Clinton won it. We're very proud of that, and we're not too worried. I think David Perdue won Baldwin County, whereas he lost it to Michelle Nunn in 2014. So if we look down the ballot, Republicans here in Middle Georgia and in Baldwin County are looking pretty good. Of course, we would have loved for President Trump to perform a bit better here, but he is going to win the state of Georgia, and we're confident about that.
Ariel, I have a question for you. What has maybe surprised you thus far about the election, and how do you see it playing out going forward?
Well, to me, the most unusual thing about this election is how long it's lasting. In a way, I'm used to being able to know the day after the election who the next president is going to be, and that's not the case with this one. I'm hoping we'll be able to know that by the end of the week. I think I read earlier that Pennsylvania should have all their ballots counted by Friday, which I think is the latest any state will have all of their ballots in. So hopefully within a few days we will know, but to me that's been, well, maybe not exactly surprising because we knew that it was going to take longer due to the amount of absentee ballots this year, but that's the most unusual thing about this election to me. That, and also the fact that Georgia is considered a swing state now. Previously, it's been pretty solid red. I mean, no Democratic presidential candidate has won Georgia since 1992. So the fact that there is actually a possibility this year that Biden might end up winning Georgia is pretty surprising to me.
Right. I want to press you, JC. I want to go back to that. I want to bring James in on this as well. And John Chapman, I see you over there. We're definitely going to get to you as well. But since we're focusing in on Georgia, I want to press you a little bit on what Timberly said. We're seeing across the state, and we'll start with James on this. Though Purdue is outperforming President Trump, in many counties, which does signal what we saw back in 2016, where some Republicans may be turned off by the president are voting Republican down ballot, but not necessarily at the top of the ticket. But Ossoff is underperforming Joe Biden. James, what does that say to you about a candidate like John Ossoff? And never held political office before. He's young. Do you think that has any effect? What's the reason for that?
He probably just needed to brand himself as an outsider, and that would have helped them. But no, I think that's more candid. Unfortunately, I don't know why it is that he tends to energize sort of right-wing turnout against him. You also, obviously with the comparison to Joe Biden is far more moderate than I think large portions of the Democratic Party, and more close, I think, aligns with sort of the average voter. So that can, you can see some of that switch there. As far as down ballot voting, Democrats, for whatever reason, we tend not to get in. Our party unity is not always that great. So I think that's a portion of it, a lot more Democrats this election. But we do get overlooked often. I don't think the DNC will overlook, or the DCCC will overlook Georgia quite as much now, given that we're close. I think that's an important thing to note. But I think the down ballot race there, I think it's more reflective of sort of the positions of Biden and Ossoff, and less a particular trend in Georgia politics.
Right. JC.
Yes, I think when I was answering Timberley's question earlier, I don't think this trend of Senator Perdue outperforming President Trump spells trouble for state elections and Republicans here in Georgia. I think the Republican Party, I think this is pretty clear, is having a problem with suburban white voters, and that's definitely something we hope we can address, especially heading into the midterms in 22, where we hope to take back control of the House. And we've seen throughout this election, we flipped 7 House seats. 5 of those were ones that the Democrats took in 2018. So I definitely think Republicans have a path forward to maintain control of Georgia, both in the state legislature and on the national level. I think it's definitely going to be a fight, and the Democrats are going to give us a run for our money. But at the end of the day, the more they invest here, the more energized the Republican engine will be here in Georgia.
Right, and that is a very important thing to note. Republicans did manage to flip a very key seat in the Georgia legislature, and that is the seat of House Minority Leader Bob Trammell. The Democratic leader in the State House of Representatives will not be going back to the state capitol in January. Eric or Timberly, I want to bring you all in. I don't want to monopolize the conversation. Go ahead.
John Chapman, I'd like to get you involved a little bit here. Seems like one of the trends in 2016 was the polls preemptively kind of counting out Trump. And it seems like they were kind of doing that again this time. It seems like a lot of polls had Biden winning probably pretty easily. And it seems like Trump has outperformed those polls again, even in what's looking like it could be a loss. What do you make of that?
Well, we know in 2016, the polls failed to account for non-college educated white men to a significant extent. I know the polls have been adjusted for 2020 to better account for that vote. So obviously we're seeing some sort of other polling mistake here, but I think that it's definitely not as drastic as 2016 was. We're just, but Biden is definitely underperforming from what the Democrats hoped he would do and what was predicted.
Ariel mentioned earlier that the thing that has stood out to her thus far has been the amount of absentee ballots being sent in. There's been a lot made of that. I'd be curious, which candidate do you think that benefits and why?
Well, traditionally, absentee ballots will benefit Democratic candidates. The phenomenon known as blue shifting, where the Republican candidate initially wins, and then Democrats increase their vote share after mail-in ballots are counted. But with this unique year, I think it's important to look at that carefully because you have to consider the older people voting that are more vulnerable to COVID might have been more likely to vote by mail than they would have been in another election year. So I think there's a strong chance that mail-in ballots will benefit Joe Biden over Donald Trump, but maybe not as much as anticipated previously.
Timberly?
I feel like this election has not only been historic, but we have seen so many trends broken. So if Biden takes this election, normally Florida sides with the presidential winner, except for in some cases. So since 1964, if I'm not mistaken, it's only been one election where Florida has not backed the presidential winner. If we expect in upcoming elections to see more swing states make such a big impact?
I think in the upcoming elections, both in the midterms and in the 2024 presidential election, we are going to see states that are traditionally one side come into play, and states that used to be swing states kind of go out of that swing state status, states like Ohio and Florida. And I think a lot of that has to do with changing demographics. We see Republican gains. I mean, Nevada and Arizona. We see a lot of different battleground shifting. And I think that's definitely going to materialize a lot more in 2024.
Right. Oh, well, I'm so glad, Timberly, that you brought up the state of Florida. It was a key state for the president, and it was going to be seen as an early barometer that night, or last night. And whether or not he carried that state was going to tell us early on his chances. The state of Florida, the president won by 1.2% back in 2016. This is a state that President Obama won both times, in 2008 by 2.81% and by a little more than 0.8% back in 2012. President Trump won it handily this time. James, I'm going to ask you, what the heck happened in Florida?
Well, one thing that's sort of, and this is sort of what I've been listening to on the 538 folks. So another quick shout out to those wonderful folks. But no, a lot of it has been, some of the polling data was not done particularly great in that they just count sort of Latino votes and not differentiate because, Cuban American voters are very different than other types of Latino voters. So Cuban American voters tend to be more conservative than other voters. So I think that was part of it. That was a large part of it. That and sort of, we can. There are a couple other things, but in particular, I think that is sort of the biggest thing. So I think that trend may hold in Florida. We'll have to see. But it sort of, I think it may be a little bit more localized, or maybe it's not that. But I think sort of the most plausible explanation I've seen so far has been in Florida that it's been Cuban American voters who tend to be more conservative.
Right. Very interesting. JC, I want to bring you in here because, of course, this was a very important state for the president. Those 29 electoral votes key to his path to 270. He won by a larger margin than Ron DeSantis won back in 2018. What do you think about the results?
I think it's very indicative of the commitment the Trump campaign this go around made to ground game efforts. If we look at battleground states like Georgia, Ohio, Florida, we had heavy Republican investment in the voter registration efforts, the door knocking efforts, the phone banking, the neighborhood team leader structure, like from top to bottom, was really streamlined. We had record communication and team building between state and local GOP chapters, which helped a lot, especially with down ballot conservatives all across the country, and especially in states like Florida, and especially in the 2 House seats we just won back there. So I think a lot of it does have to do with the investments the campaigns put in that state and the ground game that they built over the past year and a half, 2 years.
Right. And I know I'm supposed to hand it over to Eric, but I want to ask you one more thing about Florida and just money overall. In this race, people were very concerned because the president's money was drained. The campaign's money was drained. He was having to pull back a lot of ad buys in these states. And his solution to that was to go to these states and hold rallies and blitz the airwaves. Were you at all concerned when you saw the lack of funding and the lack of money in the campaign accounts there?
I was not, just because of the massive expenditures the campaign had already made in terms of voter registration efforts all across the nation, in terms of hiring staffers in key battleground states, having trained volunteers, both paid and unpaid. And those structures are more socially based and communally based. So those really didn't have an impact. Like, those people are still going to be knocking doors, making phone calls, regardless of if, the national HQ is putting an ad on the YouTube in the area or whatever. So, and then of course, I mean, hats off to Act Blue and the Dems. I mean, y'all had awesome fundraising efforts, and I'm sure we'll be mimicking it in 2024 to do something similar. So, but I think it is important you brought up funding. I think looking at Lindsey Graham's race in South Carolina is a great example of out-of-state liberals, especially in California and New York, can throw money into these states to try to influence the election. And the will of the people of Kentucky, the will of the people of Iowa, of Maine, of South Carolina have defended yet again their Senate seats for their Republican senators. And I think that says a lot about, you can put a lot of money in, but at the end of the day, that's not everything that matters.
Right, and we'll definitely be talking about the Senate coming up. Eric, you are going to get your time. I'm going to give it right to you, but I want to give you this breaking alert that I just got from WSB Radio. It says President Trump's campaign is filing a lawsuit here in Georgia in an effort to pause vote counts in key battlegrounds. So we already talked about Michigan. It looks like that's going to also expand here to Georgia. So keep our eyes on that. All right, Eric, it's all yours.
Ariel, I would like to take that and toss this to you. What have you made thus far of all the news coming out of Fulton County, votes delayed, not being counted, and now we've just learned that the Trump administration, in addition to the lawsuit he's filed in Michigan, is now filing one in Georgia? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Mine?
Ariel's.
Oh, Ariel's. Ariel, hit it.
Well, I am honestly not entirely surprised to see this, given the trend that absentee ballots cast through mail tend to be generally in favor of Democratic candidates. So it does not really surprise me too much that the Trump campaign might assume that the more absentee ballots are counted, the bigger an advantage Biden will have as those are counted. So I expect to see a legal battle over this. I don't know how long it's going to last. I don't know how successful it's going to be for President Trump or how unsuccessful that will be. Honestly, I'm just interested to see how that plays out.
It certainly seems that it's part of the Trump administration's strategy at this point to file lawsuits, contest votes, make sure everything that's being done to make sure that every vote gets counted is being done. John Chapman, do you think the Trump administration filing this lawsuit on Georgia kind of falls in line with the strategy that he's displayed thus far?
I think it very obviously falls in line with the strategy. But, when we went to bed last night, we went to bed knowing that hundreds of thousands of Fulton County votes were not counted at that point. And then as we woke up today, we saw Joe Biden's vote share in Georgia steadily increasing. I think the Trump campaign is nervous because if Georgia flips, then Joe Biden is over 270 electoral college votes. President Trump can't win without Georgia. And I think this is a very blatant attempt to prevent Fulton County votes from being counted and to prevent Georgia from casting its votes for Joe Biden.
In your opinion, is this attempt, does this have merit, or do you think that this is him kind of scratching at what's left?
To say that it has merit is absolutely ridiculous. This is an attempt to stop votes from being counted that were cast before the election day or during election day. And this is obviously Trump trying to ensure that Georgia doesn't flip to Joe Biden, and it's absolutely ridiculous.
Kimberly, I'll hand it over to you in just one moment. But first, JC, I'd be interested to hear your take on this.
I'm going to refrain from giving my opinion right now until I can look more into exactly what the lawsuit entails and the particular situation. I haven't checked up on the vote tally in a few hours, so I'm going to refrain from giving my opinion right now.
Fair enough. And what a world it would be if all political pundits checked all the facts before stating their opinion.
So, Eric, the question that was most on my mind was what merit would Trump have if he filed in these states? So I'm going to move a little bit more down. So with whoever wins this election, they're going to need the support of Congress to really enact the policies that they need. So as of right now, as we were printing this, Democrats have lost a seat in the Senate, if I'm not mistaken. However, they have gained in the House. So I'm going to throw this to James first. Do you think that if Biden wins, he should worry that he's not going to have the support of Congress? I'm sorry, can you guys hear me? Because I see Eva said she can't.
I can hear you, but it's slightly muffled.
Yeah, it's
It's
I can hear you, but it's very quiet.
I think what you're asking, Timberly, we can come back to you, but I think what you're asking is, should former Vice President Biden be concerned about the possibility of not having the support of Congress, maybe having a divided government? Got it. Who do you want it to go to, James?
I mean, yeah, we definitely need to take a look at the Senate and where it'll be, and then we won't know the actual composition, I'm pretty sure, but until a little bit later. I think I don't know if the final results are in. I've been following the presidential mostly. Obviously that's a big concern. I'm glad we held on to the House. Glad to see that. So at the very least, there'll be one chamber of Congress. But I think that is a real concern. Although at the very least, we've had divided government before. We'll continue to have divided government. Hopefully we can still get responses passed through Congress, whether that and obviously that requires some amount of negotiation, but then that's true of any divided government, whether or not whether depending on who has the presidency or not. But I'm hoping, even if that's the case, I'm still hoping Joe Biden is practical enough to get the stuff that the Democratic policies that we want done, and obviously that means we'd have to trade on some things and to compromise. But I think it's possible, even if Joe Biden wins and Democrats don't win the Senate. I think there are still good outcomes that can come out of that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, and I'm glad we've transitioned to the Senate. And James, you said we don't know the results. You're exactly right. We don't know the results in Michigan. That is a state that the Democrats currently hold. That's Senator Gary Peters trying to hold on to his seat there. And he's running against a candidate, Mr. James, there, and that he currently is behind with 48.6% of the vote to Senator Peters' 49.5%. Really the biggest battleground, and James, I'm sure you would agree, and JC, you as well. You were talking about Arizona before. Let's talk about the Senate race. Martha McSally versus the astronaut and husband of former Arizona Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords, Mark Kelly. It's looking like that is a potential race that Republicans could lose. That's one that the GOP was concerned about going into tonight. How are you feeling?
I think it's important that we get all of the votes counted. Of course, whatever the outcome is, I think our majority will be fine. I don't think we're in any danger of losing that because of that Arizona seat. But personally, I had anticipated us to lose that seat. But if President Trump does pull through in Arizona as we expect him to, there is that hope that McSally will ride that wave. But personally, I don't buy it.
Right. I can tell you it was big news, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this as well. So Senator Collins is going to hold on to her seat there in Maine. James, I'm also going to bring that around to you because she was a controversial figure, especially because of her support for Brett Kavanaugh. But JC, more recently, she's been controversial for her not voting to confirm Amy Coney Barrett. How do you feel about Senator Collins returning for, I believe, her fourth term in office, something like that?
I think Maine is a great example of people voting their conscience and being able to transcend party ideology. So of course, I love that we're able to maintain a red Senate seat up there. Of course, while I don't always agree with Senator Collins, I appreciate her integrity. If she felt like it was inappropriate for her to vote to confirm Justice Barrett, of course, I disagree with her. But I think it's important that we have leaders in our Senate and in our party that, do uphold what they believe in and do make the right calls when they feel like that's what's best.
Right, James. Sarah Gideon, the speaker, the speaker of the Maine House of Representatives, was favored leading right up into election night, and currently, I believe that margin. I don't want to tell you the wrong thing here. Susan Collins taking it with 50.3% of the vote to Sarah Gideon's 43%. So tell me what you think about that.
Obviously, that's upsetting. We were hoping to take a couple places. I know, we basically were going to lose Alabama. I mean, Doug Jones is running up against a former football coach. There's just no competing with that in Alabama. But yeah, I'm sad we didn't gain that seat. We saw a number of times where people stand on principle and then sort of not vote that way throughout her career. But it's upsetting, obviously, to lose a potential seat that we could have flipped. I don't know what else. There's much more to say other than that.
It's a little disappointing.
Yeah, it's a little disappointing. I was a little bit surprised that Republicans turned out for her quite the way that they did, just because she was. It is sort of a type of, not maverick, but the type where they sort of will occasionally break rank, but and then
her voting record is 67% with President Trump.
Yeah. So she wasn't. I don't think she was going to get much of the Democratic vote share, so I don't think that's where it came from.
Right.
Democrats were not particularly happy with her on a couple of key votes that I think would have been important. But sad to see it. Sad to see it go. But I'm hoping. I'm a little less hopeful about the Senate, but I'm hoping we maybe the ridiculous happens. Who knows?
All right, who knows?
I think it's interesting that we're seeing more moderate conservatives being able to hold on to their seats, where the Montana senator, who was I believe it was Montana, was a more conservative Democrat, and he lost his seat. So I think it's interesting that the Republicans are more willing to, go with the more moderate Republican than a more conservative Democrat, while it's not the same for the other side.
Right. Well, that's an interesting point. You could really carry that over into the Senate race there in Alabama. Doug Jones was seen as more of a moderate, but you're right. Steve Bullock, the very popular Democratic governor, who's more moderate, he did lose to the incumbent Republican Steve Daines out there in Montana, which is a state you wouldn't think would be in play. Ariel and John, I will ask you this because it's kind of a funny, lighthearted question. Do you all think that there was any Republican voter in Alabama? And I can think of an obvious reason why they wouldn't vote for Tommy Tuberville. It has to do with football. That's my hint. Now you have to know where Tommy Tuberville was the coach. Now, why would a Republican in Alabama not vote for Tommy Tuberville in that Senate race? Anyone help me, John?
Well, if they're a Bama fan, they're obviously not going to vote for an Auburn man.
You got it. All right, $5 to each. All right, back to you.
I would like to steer us a little bit away from the Senate race, at least for now. And James, I would pose this question to you. Say hypothetically Joe Biden is able to hold on and secures the presidency. What will you look for from his administration within the first 100 days in office?
Well, obviously, I think we'll look. Every time you see a change in power like that, you see a couple of reversal of some standard executive orders that every Democratic president does them one way, every Republican president does it the other way. So I think obviously you'll see those. I think we'll see increased push, obviously, for Democratic leaning ideas. It will be interesting because I know that the party itself is we're together right now. I hope we will continue to be together on a lot of things. But I'm hopeful we'll come together to at least do our best to start governing. I'll be interested to see what Joe Biden does on foreign policy. So we've hopefully we'll see increased strength. We'll see increased strengthening of things like NATO, dialogue with more countries around the world, confrontation where it's necessary, and sort of a return to American foreign policy that was a bipartisan consensus up until Obama.
And of course, the most perhaps time urgent issue of the day is COVID-19. Do you think that Joe Biden is going to have the ability to create a tangible effect on the way our country fights this pandemic?
Yeah, now granted, part of it obviously is up to state governments. So, we've seen that throughout the pandemic is, certain states are doing better and worse than others, and depending on what type of lockdowns they do and for how long they stay. So, obviously having a national policy where DDC and the NIH can help with National Institutes for Health. Yeah, I was making sure. I was like, hopefully I didn't just say the British system. No, the work with the states cooperatively to develop plans for them and to support them in ways that will be sort of best for that individual state. And I think obviously the biggest hurdle I think will be Congress, because Congress, the Senate has been very reluctant to do spending right now. So, that'll be sort of the biggest hurdle. But as far as like sort of logistical support or providing public health information, I think, CDC does good work. I think they'll continue to do good work. Hopefully Joe Biden, if he's doing his job right, he'll let the public health experts do what the public health experts do best, rather than being involved with them and having it and raising certain political figures to a national stage, to engaging them in political dialogue. Hopefully we'll just see listening to the experts where the experts where the experts are the experts. I think that should be a given.
And you are certainly right to shine a light on the fact that there are certainly factors that go beyond the presidency that influence the way this country fights the pandemic. Timberly, I'll throw it over to you now.
Timberly? We're having a little bit of trouble. Can you hear us, Timberly? All right, we can't hear you too well, but we were going to offer you up the next question.
Can y'all hear me, or would it be easier for me to text it?
Now we hear you much better. Stay like that.
It's becoming, as we process, it's becoming more clear that Biden is going to take Arizona. It would be very, very rare for it to flip at this point. So what we're seeing is for the first time in 24 years, Arizona is blue. So with that, JC, if he does put a suit on this, what would be the merit, in your opinion?
What was the question?
So Arizona is not blue. I know you said earlier that Trump is hoping and pushing that Arizona will back him as the presidential candidate, but it is now clear that Biden will take that seat. So what merit do you think Trump will use if he follows suit and calls foul in the state of Arizona?
Well, firstly, I'm going to wait for a better consensus before I concede that Biden has won the state. Secondly, I'm not going to speculate on what legal issues there may or may not be. If the president's legal team sees that they have a case and that there is a threat to our election security there, and they feel like votes are not getting properly counted or whatever the issue may be, then that's his team's prerogative to make, and that will be their decision.
Right. I want to piggyback off of what Timberly said there. JC, it's not just the Associated Press, but Fox News has actually projected that state for former Vice President Joe Biden. I know you want to wait and see how everything shakes out there, but that was once known as the cradle of conservatism in this country. James heard me say that several times last night. It's the home of Barry Goldwater. It's the home of Sandra Day O'Connor, the first female justice on the Supreme Court. It was a reliably Republican state, has not gone for a Democrat, I believe. I read last night, since 1948. And so that would make it very significant if Joe Biden carries that. What does that say about how the president has reshaped the map and how his policies may be impacting these diversifying states? What say you?
I think that a lot of the results we're seeing in the state of Arizona might have a lot to do with the older population, might have a lot to do with how people perceive he's done his work on coronavirus and their prospects in the future. As an incumbent president, you are bound to lose a state. And, you know, maybe he missed the mark there with connecting with the Arizona voters. It will be interesting to see how the state legislature plays out in the state of Arizona. I think that will have a better description of what the future for the Republican Party looks in Arizona. But I would like to say there's a lot of other areas that Joe Biden, like we mentioned before, is underperforming Hillary Clinton. I think just across the nation, we are seeing a lot of different shifts in which areas of the country are voting for which party. And I think it's going to be a few election cycles before we see kind of the broader overall trends. But for me, one thing that has me excited is the amount of support among Latino voters that we're seeing and our steady levels across a lot of other demographics as well. So I'm not scared for the future of the Republican Party or for conservatism, regardless of the outcome of this election.
All right. John, I want to ask a question to you. John Chapman, your organization, the Georgia College Political Society, it aims to encourage, you know, a healthy discussion amongst the political parties, if I'm not mistaken. This election is so close, and a lot of people were hopeful that it was going to be decisive. How is your organization going to try to continue to keep up that healthy debate here on campus as we still await the winner in this election? How are you going to do that when, you know, there is passion on both sides?
Well, I think in this election, we were fortunate enough to see a very high record level of participation that we haven't seen in a very long time. So I think that speaks very well for how interested voters are. But I think we definitely want to wait and see until how the election shakes out before we develop a plan for moving forward. Obviously, depending on which candidate wins, there's going to be a lot of anxiety and discontent from either side. So the plan should definitely be tailored based on which person sits in the Oval Office in 2021.
Right. Ariel, I want to ask a question to you, talking specifically about libertarian candidates. Shane Hazel ran against David Perdue, and John Ossoff took 2% of the vote there in that race. You know, you can say one way or the other which side that he took that percentage from. It is an increasingly close race in the state of Georgia here. What do you see as the future for libertarian candidates in the state of Georgia? And was it wise for the libertarians to run a candidate in such a hotly contested race?
Well, I personally think that the future of libertarian candidates, both referring to the Libertarian Party and to libertarian candidates who have, you know, ideological values that align with libertarianism, regardless of which party they run under, if any. I think the future of libertarian candidates is in state and local races, just because it is so difficult to win a major election like a Senate race or, you know, the presidency when you are a member of a minor party. It just is incredibly difficult to win those races without the name recognition and the resources of those two major parties. So I think that generally libertarian candidates who run for offices, you know, like Senate seats, as Shane Hazel has done, are doing it more to to make a stand in a way to get the message of libertarian ideas out there and get more recognition for either the Libertarian Party or for libertarian ideas, rather than intending to actually win that seat. I think that the future of actually, winning elections is in more local level and state level races where it's easier to win those elections as a minor party candidate.
Right, right. Eric, back to you.
JC, a little while ago, you touched on the Republican Party's growing popularity among Latino voters. I'd be curious as to why you think that trend is and how you see it going forward.
Yeah, I think that when we look at where he's getting this support from Latino voters, a great example is Miami-Dade County. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won Miami-Dade by 63%. Joe Biden won it by 53%. So that's a 10% decrease in the margin of victory for Democrats in a large Latino county. I think his pro-law and order message resonates with Latino Americans. Of course, I'm not going to speculate as to what exactly resonates with such a diverse group of people and cultures and history and preferences. But I think being pro-life, being pro-legal immigration means a lot to people who did go through the legal immigration processes and have worked so hard and have sacrificed so much to get here. And, they want to make sure that they're protecting that for their kids so that they can enjoy the things that they do now because of their hard work. And I think another one is the growing threat of socialism coming from the left and from candidates like Kamala Harris and her pledge for equity across government institutions. I think that increasing threat, it really scares people that did come here to escape the horrors of socialism and democratic socialism and communism. And I mean, that's a real threat. And it seems something that mainstream media and a lot of Americans are willing to just kind of like bury their heads in the sand on. But, it's hard to do that when you know what the real life consequences are of those types of policies.
I'm glad you brought that up. There certainly was a lot of noise being made about Kamala Harris's tweet the other night about equity over equality. The left has been pushing a lot of critical race theory, and now we're seeing it in voters. Apparently, now we're seeing it in the polls. Apparently, there are voters who believe that socialism for the left is a concern. James, I would pose this question to you. Do you think that fear over socialism is warranted? Why or why not?
Absolutely not. I mean, I always love this question because I think the people that I know that would openly call themselves socialists would laugh at the idea that Kamala Harris is a socialist. So it's not a big. I don't see it as some sort of threat that somehow the left is being co-opted or whatever. I mean, it's. I don't like. There are people who are farther left than I am for sure, but it is not a large percentage. Joe Biden won the Democratic primary. He got more votes than anyone else, and he is most decidedly not a socialist. Kamala Harris is not a socialist. Don't know what else there is to say there other than the standard bearers for the party are not socialists. I'm not a socialist. I don't know. I mean, there may be a couple socialists in the party, but I mean, there were a couple Tea Party people in the Republican Party, and they weren't asked, if there was going to be some sort of violent or not violent, but some sort of overthrow from within the party. So, I think it's premature at best to say that somehow, that the Democrats have been co-opted by the socialists. It's a ruse.
Well, I don't think I said that y'all have been co-opted. I think there's a rising threat of that. When you see really extreme stances being normalized, like the anti-Semitism coming from a lot of some of your members in your party. And I think a lot of it is more cultural as well. So I will agree. I don't think that there's a growing number of undercover socialists among, the Democratic delegation in Congress. But I think the normalization of socialist ideas, and Kamala Harris is the most liberal member of the Senate. So to say that she's not more far left than most Americans, I mean, that's a reasonable statement. And I don't think it matters what we call ourselves. Like, I mean, there's a lot of terms that you and your side will call us that I don't agree I would call myself either. What is at issue here is the policies that you're going to put in place. And when you have someone that's ascending or might ascend to the vice presidency, it matters when she says we're going to enforce equality of outcome throughout our government institutions and bureaucracies. That's millions of jobs. That's a lot of moving parts, and a lot of that is hard to get rid of once it's there. And so I think that is what we're talking about when we talk about the growing socialist threat.
James, I'd know that you'd like to reply. I'm just going to go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna make sure it was my turn on this one. No, I think first off, as far as the Senate goes, the Senate is not reflective of the average American. Being the most left person in the Senate, it's like being, it might as well say, you're the most left person in the state in the state of Georgia. I mean, we're not a particularly left leaning state. So, also I think it's interesting to note that apparently Kamala Harris is more socialist than an actual more left leaning or liberal than an actual sitting Democratic socialist or whatever he calls himself, one of the independents in the Senate. So that's interests me at the very least. But no, I don't think it's this country is founded on equality under the law. I think that is not controversial, and I think that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about letting people, have equal opportunities to the things that this country promises, and we haven't always lived up to that promise. And I think the Democratic Party of the future will definitely try and work for the equality that people do deserve.
Equality of opportunity is not what is at debate. So equity means equality of outcome. That's different than equality under the law or equality of opportunity. Those aren't the same thing.
Ariel, I'd like to get you involved here before we move off of this topic. From your perspective, do you think that the perceived threat of radicalism for the left is warranted, and why or why not?
I really don't think it is, to be honest. I think that a lot of people on the right and among libertarians tend to kind of throw around the word socialism a little more than is warranted, and to see it as a boogeyman in a way, when I really don't think that a potential President Biden and Vice President Harris will actually implement too many, if any, policies that would actually be considered really socialist. I think, they would definitely push for and probably enact some policies that are definitely farther left than people on the right and probably many libertarians would like to see. But I think that doesn't necessarily make them socialist. And I think the fear that Biden and Harris might potentially serve as puppets isn't the word that I want to use, but that they might kind of be co-opted by some radical element of the Democratic Party is probably not well-founded.
Mm-hmm. I think you bring up a good point that Biden and Harris aren't necessarily the most radical members of their own party. I thought Stacey Abrams brought up a good point. She had a quote a couple of weeks ago that the election doesn't have to be a vote for a savior, it simply has to be a vote for the next step forward. And I think that from the Democratic Party's perspective, that is definitely a step forward.
Timberly, back to you. Do you have a question? No questions. I do want to note this before we go back around to another topic as we begin to wrap things up here. This is a statement from the Trump campaign on their lawsuit here in Georgia. And from what I've just been reading, I just saw this a moment ago. It's saying that a Republican poll observer in Georgia witnessed 53 late absentee ballots illegally added to a stack of on-time absentee ballots in Chatham County. And this is quoting here, "We will not allow Democrat elections officials to steal this election from President Trump with late illegal ballots. President Trump and the Georgia Republican Party have filed a suit to require all Georgia counties to separate any and all late arriving ballots from all illegally cast ballots to ensure free and fair elections in which only legal valid ballots count. And that comes from Justin Clark, Deputy Campaign Manager and Senior Counsel there on the Trump campaign. That is sent out by Raul Bowley. I'm retweeting that right now, so you can take a look at that. Very interesting. We will keep an eye on that. Now, I want to talk about the House briefly before we wrap things up. The House of Representatives, JC, the Georgia 6th District, used to be known as the jewel in the crown of the Republican Party of Georgia. It's now in Democrat hands. It was the seat of Newt Gingrich. It's in the suburbs. It was, Karen Handel was vying for her seat again. I don't know where in the state you're from, if you're from the metro Atlanta area or not. What do you think went wrong in that race?
Honestly, personally, I wasn't a big fan of Karen Handel for that particular race. I think someone new would have been a bit better. But I mean, I don't think anyone's necessarily surprised that we did not gain that seat back. I think that just follows the trend we're seeing of Republicans and the president particularly underperforming with white suburbia. Again, part of changing demographics. That's definitely something that we were taking into consideration when we were considering our path to victory, I'm sure. And it's definitely something that the Republican Party is aware of and is calculating as we move forward in further elections. Right.
Well, Eric, Timberly, any other questions you'd like to ask? If not, I might like to just open it up for reactions overall as we close things out.
I would like to turn it over to our panelists. It's an unprecedented election, and before we wrap it up, if y'all have any last thoughts, anything weighing on your hearts or minds, speak your piece.
I would like to congratulate Sky Jess for winning the Solicitor General position, her reelection here in Baldwin County. She's one of the first people to run as a Republican and win that. So we were very excited to endorse and support her. We also are very excited that Republicans will maintain a majority of majorities in the state legislature. So regardless of the presidential election, a lot of good has happened for Republicans here in Georgia and all across the country. And we're excited to build on this momentum in 2022.
So, yeah, no, I think, obviously a lot of Democrats I know are biting their nails right now. So, we'll see how this ends up. May the courts do what they're supposed to do and not be very activist. Hopefully the most recent appointees to the court will be very conservative in how they do things and not create new elections law like we saw in Bush v. Gore. I'll be watching this till the very end. I've been tired for 2 days. Jonathan and I, we were getting a little loopy at the end there. So at the very least, I know I'll be catching up on some sleep today. But I'm excited for the future. Nervous for now, but I'm excited for the future. And I hope we see President Biden in the next couple of days.
Ariel or John?
John, you can go first.
Okay. I'd just like to say, I think it's interesting. We are now looking at potentially for the future an additional battleground state. If Georgia continues to be as purple as it has been in this election, I think it'll be definitely an interesting outcome. And as JC said, representative of shifting demographics. We would definitely like to see Democrats becoming more competitive in the state of Georgia. And we would like to ensure that all ballots are counted from this election in the state of Georgia, regardless of any fictitious lawsuits filed by the Trump administration.
Well, I think illegally adding ballots is not a fictitious or frivolous lawsuit at all.
I have complete faith in our poll workers and their capacity to differentiate between when ballots arrived and their capacity to follow procedure and place late arrived ballots where they're supposed to be.
And I think it's important that our judicial system investigate any claim of voter fraud, because it's very important that we protect the integrity of our elections, and that should be taken seriously and shouldn't be written off for political purposes.
Especially from the Georgia Secretary of State's office. I 100% agree.
And I think it's important that Ariel get her opinion in here now.
Thank you, Jonathan. As John mentioned, I'm very interested to see the future of Georgia as a potential battleground state. As I mentioned before, I'm surprised to see how competitive Georgia is this year and that there's a real possibility that Biden could potentially win Georgia. I'd like to see in the future whether Georgia remains competitive in that way. And I'm also very interested to see the future of national politics, regardless of which candidate wins. If President Trump wins re-election, this will be his last term, and he will not be eligible to run again. And if President Biden is who we have for the next 4 years, there's a possibility that Trump could run again in the future. But regardless of who wins this election, I think this will be the end of, or near the end of the Trump era in American politics. And the last 4 years have been so completely dominated by President Trump in terms of the political atmosphere, either support for him or reaction against him. So I will be very interested to see in the next presidential election what that atmosphere is like when it's not so dominated by either support for Trump or hostility against him. So I think we have a very, very different political future ahead of us from what we've had the last few years.
Right. Very interesting. We'll see how it all happens. Eric, Timberly, any final thoughts?
I am cheering for the peaceful transition as the lights gracefully go out on me. I'm rooting for the peaceful transition of power. If it comes to that, whatever happens, I hope it stays out of the courts and out of the city streets.
Timberly?
Kind of want to echo that. So just a peaceful transition, and also hopefully all supporters on both sides can stay respectful as, we go through this transition no matter who the winner is called. So I am hopeful. And I'm also glad that a lot of things as far as like voter suppression and things like that have been called out this time. It has been amazing to see such a record-breaking number of voters this time around. So hopefully going into future elections, we see that. But, again, everyone just reminders, stay respectful, regardless of who wins, because at the end of the day, freedom is what we're supposed to be fighting for, regardless of who is supposed to be bringing that.
Right, I like that right there. Regardless of who wins, be respectful of everyone. We're not on anyone's side right now. At least the three of us aren't. We're on America's side, and we all want what's best for the country. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. John Chapman, Ariel Ebod, J.C. Gaylor, James, and of course my fellow student media leaders, Eric Boyd and Timberly Spikes. It has been a pleasure discussing all of this with you. Much more to talk about as this election continues to wind its way up. Joe Biden still leading in the electoral college vote with 264, also leading in the popular vote with a little more than 50%. Stay tuned to WGUR for all of the election updates. If you're watching us online, have a great night.